In this update, we're going to go over my December forecast, and what we'll find is a tale of two halves. The first half being on the much milder side, the second half being on the much colder side. So let's walk you through the details going forward. Remember, we're coming off the Arctic blast that impacted a good part of the US after Thanksgiving. We still have a couple of more days and the final days of November. Still feeling that very cold air, some of the coldest temperatures we've seen so far this season, impacting the lower 48. But by the time we head into the Thursday, Friday timeframe, things are going to be starting to rapidly change as that south wind starts to kick in. The temperatures start to elevate, especially across the south and much of the southeast here, and that extends all the way up into the central plains, up here into the upper Midwest as well, while out to the west, you're going to start getting on the cooler side, places like into California, places like into the Four Corners region, back into Nevada. You're going to be seeing a trough come back in that area. You're going to be seeing some below average temperature anomalies by then. Let's take a look at the jet stream going forward. This is the kind of the transition coming off that Arctic blast. Here's the overall jet stream, and this is kind of a more of an El Nino type setup as we're beginning meteorological winter. And look what we're finding here is we're going to be seeing the overall subtropical jet digging all the way down into the Baja of California, all the way through South Texas, and then coming up through Florida, and eventually coming up the East Coast. This is going to be a predominant storm track going forward in the month of December, while much of the north, the polar jet, becomes more of a zonal flow, and a zonal flow is a more of a Pacific flow, and that means much milder air will be coming in off the Pacific, not from the Arctic anymore. We'll just have more of a milder flow, so that more or less the polar jet gets kind of tapped out. The subtropical jet, the southern branch of the jet stream, becomes more active, and that's where all the instability is going to be, and especially as we head into Thursday. So going to that time frame, we've got that the buckle into the overall subtropical jet. We're going to have these little short waves. They're going to be coming across the deep south into the Four Corners region, highlighting over Texas by the time we head into that Thursday afternoon, Friday time frame, tapping into some of those south winds, higher dew points, and some of that Gulf moisture. That is going to set the stage for possibly several rounds of severe storms. Look at the dew points by then. This is the last day of November, heading into that Friday, heading into this upcoming weekend. I think things really start to get activated across east of the I-35 corridor. Wherever you see a dew point of 55 or higher, that's typically where you're going to see severe storms. So they're going to be originating across this region and then going to be moving eastbound as we head into the weekend. So this area that I highlighted, these are the favorite areas that are a little bit more susceptible for severe storms, as well as very heavy rainfall over the course of several days. And I think that's exactly what's going to play out, because if we look at some of this severe weather aspects coming in, we've got multiple days we got to be concerned about as it taps into the warm sector. This would be the last day of November the 30th here, looking at east of the I-35 corridor, mainly in East Texas, eastern Oklahoma, back into Arkansas here, wherever you saw like a 55-degree dew point or higher. That is your higher probability of seeing some severe storms or turning severe. And it's not just one day. This would be probably multiple days coming in. So we're looking at a very active time frame on the severe weather front, starting on Thursday, going into that Friday time frame, but that extends into Saturday, Sunday, and possibly even Monday, as that will finally shift off in portions of the Carolinas by then. And this is where the heavier rains would unfold over the next 7 days, mainly highlighted where on Thursday, with that system coming in, we got a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday type setup headed into Monday. We're talking some very heavy rain. Some of this could be strong to severe at times, but very beneficial rains across the deep south into Louisiana, back into Mississippi and Alabama, into Georgia, as well as into Florida. Remember, we got the trough coming in, so we're going to have some elevated rains coming in off the Pacific Northwest. That's going to enter portions of California, and some of this, as this swings across, is going to be in the form of snow, especially in the higher elevations. And then once it gets up the East Coast here, a little bit lighter amounts, but still some light to moderate rains are going to be impacting those areas into that first week of December. What's noticeable though is, let's take a look at the EPO, which is your Eastern Pacific Oscillation, just to kind of keep it in layman's terms. Remember where we came from when it was negative. That put the cooler anomalies, colder anomalies into the lower 48, especially along the central and eastern 2/3 of the US. But now that it's going positive, that puts the above average anomalies into those same places. Well, it stays positive for an extended period of time, actually through that first week of December and likely into that second week of December. So I think a much milder period will be setting in into the lower 48. If we look at some of the ensemble members during that second week, this would be that December 5th through that December 12th timeframe, when the EPO is positive. That puts the above average anomalies in much of the central and eastern 2/3 of the US. So a much milder look coming up, and that's exactly what the Climate Prediction Center has highlighted as well into that second week, that 4th through that 10th timeframe of December, putting much of the lower 48 not hot, but still milder considering what you typically see this time of year for December. So here's where the jet stream and where some of the elevated heavier rains would likely unfold. Remember, it's coming in off the Aleutian Islands, diving across the west coast, but really start to amplify once it taps into some of this Gulf moisture, some of these higher dew points, some of the extended heat. Remember, heat fuels storms, and that's exactly what we're going to be finding in, likely from Louisiana through a good part of the southeast and much of the east coast. This is where we're going to see your highest precipitation anomalies in that second week of December. So overall, we've got more of a zonal flow. So we do have some snow, but it's going to be coming off the Pacific. So this is mainly going to be Intermountain West snow, some higher elevation snows. It's still going to be snowing for the ski lovers up here, but not much down in the lower levels, because there's mainly going to be some Pacific air moving into the area. And especially as you head up here and towards New England, it's more or less into the interior regions, not anything likely along the coast. It'll be probably all rain during that time frame. Say like the I-95 corridor, those places would likely be all rain as that subtropical jet pulls up the eastern seaboard. But what gets interesting, we start to make that transition once we hit the second half of December. So this is the jet stream right around the 15th of the month. This is the way it looks right now. You still have that subtropical jet. This is the most favored storm track when I put out my winter outlook. Exactly where this elongates down here into South Texas, pulls up to Florida, and comes up the East Coast as we make the transitions, a little bit of a buckle in the jet stream. And then it all has to deal with these zonal winds. So let's walk you through this as we head way up to the stratosphere. So I don't want to get too complicated, but kind of give you an idea how this works. This is what we're looking at, like the polar vortex up there. And whenever you see these zonal winds, this is up in the stratosphere. This is like 20 miles up in the atmosphere. Notice how positive they are, but notice a decrease in these zonal winds as we head into that first 10 days of December. So yes, it's starting to decrease as much of the lower 48 is on the milder side. Remember, this has got to come down 20 miles from the atmosphere. And as the polar vortex, kind of give you a breakdown on how all this works, is whenever you see the polar vortex kind of like on the strong side, the stable side, that keeps all the Arctic air, the polar air, the Arctic air well up into the Arctic and doesn't release it down into the lower 48. But when we see those zonal winds start to decrease like they are, that allows this jet stream to start to buckle. It becomes wavy. It starts to stretch. So when it stretches, it sends pulses of energy down south. We saw that a little bit towards Halloween, right? We just experienced it a little bit after Thanksgiving. This would be likely another type setup going into December, likely around December the 20th timeframe. We see another pulse of Arctic air coming in and dropping down into the lower 48 because of the polar vortex becomes weak and it becomes elongated and it shifts southbound. So if we look at the overall jet stream by then, this is December the 20th, we see a massive plunge, a buckle, huge U-shaped type buckle all the way down, sending some of that Arctic polar air down in from Canada all the way down into the lower 48. And look at that. It's almost like deja vu what we actually came from. Remember, we talked about the blocking was setting up over Alaska with the dominant ridge. We talked about the blocking again over Greenland. So we go through a mild transition, and then that same general type setup comes back in a big way. But instead, it's not the end of November anymore. It's the end of December. So just on average, you're a much colder time frame because your overall anomaly averages are colder. So this is definitely a much more significant push in Arctic air will be extending into the lower 48 as it creates that funnel effect. As blocking sets up over the top, you got the pool dome of Arctic air plunging southbound, looks to elongate, heading towards into Texas, and then it starts to moderate as it shifts eastbound as we go through Christmas week. And that's the way it looks right now. So going forward, let's take a look at this. So here's the setup on some of these temperature anomalies. And if this came to fruition, this would be pretty deepening cold into the lower 48 during that Christmas week time frame. This would likely be after the 20th, what we're looking at in some of the longer term guidance right now, but much 20, if not almost 30 degrees below average. Look at the temperature gradients would be pretty extreme during that time frame as this would plunge southbound and then shift eastward, heading towards that Christmas time frame. And obviously that would have some snow with it. So can't take this actually verbatim exactly the placement of the snow, but more or less the buckling of the jet stream, the weakening of the polar vortex would send a signal further south. So in a kind of the same general vicinity, and likely this possibly would be further south by then, by the time we head into that Christmas week time frame. But yes, definitely some much colder air. And then as that blocking continues to get amplified and stay firm, it's still going to be sending pulses of Arctic air. So it even could get colder going into that 21st of the month. All those areas in purple, we're talking below zero temperatures by then, potentially, as single digits start to enter portions of the South, likely in Texas by then, as that colder air continues to plunge. Here's where some of the snow track could potentially be during that time frame, as that first initial impulse of colder air would push further south by then, and then a reinforcing shot potentially by Christmas. I know this is a long ways out, but just kind of gives you the general vicinity. After the 20th of the month, we got to look out for Arctic air plunging southbound and impacting the lower 48. So it definitely gets busy heading towards Christmas and heading the days after Christmas, going into your New Year's Eve, New Year's Day time frame, as this would be some serious cold plunging into the lower 48. We're talking, below zero, if not almost 20 degrees below zero up there in Iowa, as the colder air would continue to plunge south. These would be, pretty piercing cold into the teens, off of almost single digits down there into Oklahoma. But here's the favored storm track as the El Nino starts to kind of kick in as well as a winter starts, right? So we see a much more active subtropical jet coming in from the Aleutian Islands, highlighting above average precipitation for much of California, likely much of the desert Southwest here, much of Texas, up here towards the Southeast, and up here through the Carolinas, and getting into the Mid-Atlantic as well as the Northeast. This would be your favorite storm track, and the kinship's kind of showing the same thing. So kind of ideal textbook type setup coming in for the El Nino, coming in for the winter, and the polar jet starts to become less active. So we'll be tapping into this more active subtropical jet, and as the jet stream buckles around the 20th time frame, we'll start to look at a much more active period. So overall, as well as like the snow, again, you can't take this exactly verbatim. It could be a little bit further south than this, but nonetheless, a lot of this gets going on a much milder first half of December, but definitely a much colder half, especially after the 20th time frame. So that 20th through that January 4th time frame, that could be a pretty cold time frame and a much active time frame and a snowier time frame in a good part of the lower 48. And definitely, if you hadn't subscribed to my channel already, please do so. I do daily content on this channel. I also have a second channel. I'll be doing more updates as well. That is Pal Ponder Ultra. And I also have my own app now. So yes, you can find it on both stores, the Apple and the Google Play. So definitely download that for yourself. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update. Fire protect you before and after storm.